Okay, everyone, we're going to get started then.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So, thank you, everyone, for helping to get this started. We are starting the meeting. Hopefully you can see it on your screen. So, I'm hoping so. Okay, so everyone, welcome to the RAISE webinar. This is the second webinar that we are hosting this year. We have a few, well, I guess third. My apologies, third webinar. We have had a wonderful few webinars on disability disclosure. We had partnered up with the Native American Parent Center on another webinar at the end of last year. This one's really special to us. It is. And also, if you are
the same
on the
number
call,
that we use for SIPR?
please mute yourself. So this webinar is something that we found really important, especially talking about independent living, talking about what we want all young adults with and without disabilities to understand. And fortunately, we have an individual, Jessica Cleaner, from the National Collaboration of Workforce and Disability for Youth, speaking today partially about some of their work and giving information on how to present developing financial capabilities. And I think this will be a wonderful webinar. And Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me and inviting me to be a part of the webinar today. I'm very excited about talking about developing financial capability among youth. And I really do appreciate all of the work that you do to support families and youth. To all the parent centers out there, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you joining in this afternoon. My name is Jessica Cleaner, and I am with the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth with the Institute for Educational Leadership. I have been in this field for 15 to 16 years now, and been very involved in the work of transitioning youth with disabilities, ensuring that strategies are put in place so that young people with disabilities can have access to all of the things that they need to be successful in the post-secondary environment. So I'm enjoying the fact that I will get to talk with you this afternoon and basically doing a train-the-trainer over the webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I do want to disclose that I do have a hearing loss, and I wear a cochlear implant on my right ear. And if you have questions for me over the phone as we get towards the end of the session, feel free to ask, but I may ask you to repeat, or you can write questions in the chat box. The other thing that I wanted to mention is down on the lower right-hand side is where it says Developing Financial Capabilities. There are files in there, so that includes the PowerPoint for today, which includes the notes, since you will be a trainer and talking to families and youth. So there's information in the notes section that I will be going over with you, along with two of our info briefs, one for youth and one for family, that all focus on financial capability. So I'm just going to go through the PowerPoint with you, and again, if you have any questions, please feel free. So today we have the very first slide. This is, of course, the title slide. One thing to keep in mind, depending on who you're talking, who your audience is, parents or youth, you want to have a good visual contrast in the title slide, and you also want to create a catchy title as well when you're engaging with young people and with parents, and there'll probably be some differences in how you want to capture that audience. One thing to keep in mind is to be mindful of language and acronyms throughout your presentation. And we tend to be, in this field, very acronym heavy, so we want to limit that as much as possible. And more importantly, you want this presentation to be as fun and as interactive as possible, and depending on the setting in which you deliver information about financial capability, whether it is through a webinar format or through a professional development training to families or to young people, you want to ensure audience participation. So this is a few reminders on the webinar etiquette. This is just a reminder to please mute your line. Feel free to use the chat, as I said, and you can also raise your hand if you need to. So as I stated earlier, I'm with the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability with the Institute for Educational Leadership. This slide is really a placeholder for you to include your organization's information. So when you are doing your presentation, but this is a sample of what it could look like. So during this session, we're going to take a look at financial capability. You want to remember that this is the objectives slide, just a reminder. Objectives are essential. It provides the audience an overview of expectations as well as help you and them stay engaged and focused on the presentation. So this presentation, the objectives are to define the financial capability, learn how youth and families can be effective with money by utilizing the 5 principles, and can someone mute their line? Thank you. By utilizing these 5 principles, which we will be going over them later on in the PowerPoint, and then additional resources. So one of the things that I like to do in a training or in a presentation is I like to open it up to people to start the conversation with the audience, no matter who my audience is. So since this is on financial capability, the question is, what does the term financial capability mean to you? And depending on the context in which you deliver this presentation, you could use it as a poll question for a webinar, or you can use it as a think, pair, share activity for families or for youth, or if you are including families and youth, you could do think, pair, share as well. But one way that this can help you in the presentation, keeping them engaged, is that the experience that they share with you about what their financial capability means to them, you can refer to their comment of what they said in the beginning of the presentation throughout your presentation to incorporate pieces of it, so that it shows that you are listening to them and they're staying engaged in the presentation. So as always with any presentation, it's always important once you have done your objectives and then once you have your topic, it's important to define that topic. And since this is financial capability, we want to define it and then show how it leads to financial success in life. So one thing to keep in mind, and I made a note of this in the notes section, is that the term financial capability has been recently adopted out of recognition that individuals need to have more than just basic literacy-related information to their finances. They also need the capability to be savvy decision makers and consumers of financial products and services, and to take care to protect their money. So it's not just simply learning about money, it's also being a consumer of that money and thinking of long-range planning, short and long-term planning that comes with it. This slide highlights the recent research on financial capability relating to youth. And one thing that I would encourage you to do is to reinforce the parental and how important the parental and hands-on experiences are, ensuring that young people develop financial capability at a young age. And this is also another slide where you can ask the audience questions, depending on your audience, if it's youth or if it's family, but you could also share your own experiences as a presenter as well, because I kind of like to think of these sessions as a conversation with your audience. And one of the things to think about is who influenced you to develop financial capability. You can share about your own experience as an example. If you're not having a whole lot of audience participation initially, sometimes people are a little shy at first and they're not wanting to talk to a room full of people. So sometimes sharing your own experiences can ease them into feeling more comfortable about sharing theirs. And then asking the audience what their first interaction was with money. The one thing that how I organized this presentation for you was so that, because you have two different audiences and sometimes you're presenting to both, sometimes you're presenting to one or the other. So you can make this presentation as flexible as it can be to your needs. So if you're only presenting to youth, then I have very specific information about what youth need to know. If you're only presenting to families, then I have slides that are specific to family. So you can kind of pull out pieces of it that you consider that is essential to your audience. And for the purposes of this presentation to all of you, all of the slides are combined together. But if you ever have an audience where you're presenting to both, then you have all of the information in one place. So what do youth need to know about financial capability? They need to understand and think about the importance of decision making and managing their money. So these are the 5 principles that are essential for them to know. And each of these areas are, as I said, principles for them to know, but will enable them to be financially capable. So earning is an important area to look into. It's basically understanding, making the most of what you earn by understanding your pay and benefits. This is a defining term. Again, these are in your notes section, so you have all of this information. And saving and investing, as we always typically say in society, and you hear people talk, is that it's never too early to start saving money for future goals. Many people relate that as to how for retirement, but for young people it could be thinking about college, and for families about college, or some other type of career, technical education or certification that they're wanting to go into. It's important to think about protecting, taking precautions about your financial situation, having emergency savings, having the right insurance. We're going to go into detail more about these things later in the presentation, but just kind of providing an overview. You want to ensure that youth know that they're getting the importance of getting a good value when they're spending their money, especially with big purchases, shopping around, comparing prices and products, and with that, everything going on in the technology world, all of the latest products that come out from different companies, it's really important to be savvy about shopping for different products that they're interested in. And then borrowing money is also another big area that they need to know. And one of the things that borrowing money can help them buy the purchases that products that they need, but it also builds credit. And when they borrow money, the key to understanding that is that there's interest that is accrued, and it can get expensive. So those are the 5 areas, principles of financial capability for youth. And each slide, each section goes into more in-depth about earning money and exactly the breakdown of what that looks like. So for this particular slide, I just highlighted the definition of earning, but then also highlighting the paycheck breakdown, so they know exactly what they need to know exactly what their net income is. So as a trainer and a presenter, I think reiterating again what it means to earn money, and highlighting to them how understanding their paycheck is essential in reaching short and long-term financial goals. And again, this is another slide where you can ask questions to youth and to families, like what things are they thinking about and reaching short and long-term goals, and what are some of the first things, for example, with families that they remember about their paycheck that they were surprised about. If you already have youth that have started work, they can also share their own experiences as well. And these next couple of this next slide is still on earning, and the next one as well. But this one focuses specifically on what families can do and how they can talk about earning with youth. And this slide provides an example of what families can do with their youth in understanding their paycheck and budgeting expenses, as well as having a discussion of connecting youth's future career interests to standards of living. I think that last bullet is the one when we talk about finances and money and earning money, we don't always connect that back to youth career interest and what the salary that is expected to receive and the standard of living that will come with that. So I think those are important things for them to consider and think about, especially when you're talking to youth in middle school and high school that are getting their first internship experiences or volunteer experiences or work experiences where they're getting paid, but they're thinking about different things that they like to do and a potential career or a job that they may want to do after they leave school. So they start early in exploring those interests, but sometimes it's not always connecting to the finance side of it. So it's an important discussion that families can be having. And again, families can share their own experiences as well, how they came to the jobs that they have and how their earnings went into their paycheck and how they have supported their family. So it's a good conversation to have with their young people. These are resources on earning that you can take time to go through and see what resources that you would like to highlight for youth and family. I just pulled just a few of them from our info brief that a couple of them for each one that we highlight, but we also have more resources in those info briefs. But you could, when you're presenting to families or to youth, you can just highlight a couple of the resources to them. For example, the Mint has a section on its website devoted to financial literacy tips for teens that includes information on how to decode your paycheck. And then the Bankit website provides ideas for families on talking with youth about various financial topics, so you can go into more in-depth information depending on your audience and what their needs are that they're looking for related to financial capability. So this is another principle that we've done earning. This is the second principle. What do you need to know about saving and investing? And I would review each of the points on the slide with them that's highlighted here. My recommendation is to dig a little deeper on the second bullet by discussing the importance of selecting where to deposit your money, is having that discussion with families and youth, and to encourage family and youth to think about whether the location of the bank or credit union and its ATM are convenient places for them to access money when they need it. Even if you handle most of the banking transactions on computers or smartphones, I think that's an important thing to reiterate to youth, particularly because everybody is so in tune to their smartphones and computers these days. So they still need to think about where their banks are located, physically located, in the ATMs as well. And then the cost associated with opening an account is something to keep in mind in having a conversation around that. And then also highlighting, again, the importance of creating a budget and having you need to think about and plan how much to spend over a period of time based on the income they have available, which is an important point to make when considering investing money. So how can families discuss saving and investing with youth? It's important to discuss this with youth about saving money as well as having the habit to save little for extra for emergencies and having conversations about saving up for a particular purchase. Again, this is another slide that can lead to having a conversation with families and or with youth. You could, for example, you could share time that you saved for a big purchase for yourself or your family, and how did you plan to reach your financial goals, so people can think about the essential keys and skills to think about saving and planning and investing. And then also another idea for a question was what emergency situation came up for you financially that people can share. And again, if people are still a little shy about sharing information, please feel free to use yourself in an example, and then hopefully that will get the conversation going. Encourage families to discuss the benefits of banking, and going with their youth to begin the process will help them understand the importance and lessen some of their discomfort. It can be kind of nerve-wracking and intimidating to be a young person and show up in a bank and open an account, not knowing exactly all of the questions to ask and the protocol that goes into opening an account. And if they have a family member that can go with them, can kind of ease some of the discomfort and make them feel a bit more comfortable with that. So these, again, are some resources, particularly on saving and investing. And I just want to highlight a couple of these resources that you might want to share with families and youth. The Financial Planning Association published a guide for parents that cover a variety of topics, including goal-setting worksheet that parents can work through with their youth. Sometimes it's helpful just to have a format that's already there that parents can use. They don't have to create something, so why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? So that can be a useful resource. And as well as the Business Insider article, 25 Neat Things to Know About Investing by Age 25. And it goes into detail about all of the different benefits, risks, and includes some of the jargon that's related to that in the process of choosing to make an investment. So those are some things that to think about to share with families as well. So the next principle is protecting. So when you're talking to youth and what they need to know about protecting their money. One of the things to think about is highlighting to youth the importance of purchasing insurance, that while they may be hesitant to pay for something to help them cover the cost of an expense that may not arise, insurance is important because it will likely save them money in the long run. So you could provide examples of health insurance or auto insurance. And again, this is another opportunity for people to share their experiences. You can also break up into smaller groups as well, if you're doing it in person, or you could, use the chat box feature when you are presenting a webinar with youth or family. People like to be engaged in presentations as much as possible. So relating people back to their personal experiences and then educating them from those experiences can be beneficial to them and help them remember the information better. Again, reiterate with youth the importance of saving money for emergencies. And a reminder that while technology can make life easier, it can also increase the risk of identity theft and scams. So encourage youth to be more careful about websites or companies with which they share their financial information, that it's possible for someone to steal their personal information and apply for credit cards and loans and utilities in their name. So that is something to keep in mind in talking to youth about these kinds of issues. And then also the last piece of it is having them understand about credit record and credit score, and highlighting the differences between the record and the scores. The credit record is basically a record of how many credit cards or loans someone has, and whether or not they make their payments on time, and how much they currently owe, and their credit cards compared to how much money they can still borrow with their credit cards. And then the credit agencies monitor credit history, which creates a credit report, which includes a credit score, which is essential to their getting a grade on their credit history, so to speak. So all of this, just so you know, again, just repeating information, but again, this information is also in the info briefs that are attached to this presentation as well. So you can share this information if you're not doing a PowerPoint per se, but you have resources as well and info briefs to give out if you're meeting one-on-one with parents or with youth. So how can families discuss protecting money with youth? Teaching young people to protect their money is multifaceted. Some things to discuss include how to prepare for unforeseen expenses through insurance, as I mentioned earlier, and also mentioned how to avoid theft and scams and how to protect their credit. But one thing families can do can help youth understand the long-term benefits of paying for insurance by sharing their personal experiences using insurance in case of an accident or to cover healthcare healthcare expenses. Identity theft is another part of learning to protect their money, and protecting their identity is important for you to understand personal information that should be kept private and to know when that information will be needed. So they need to understand when it is okay to share their personal financial information and when it is not okay to do that. Credit protection is also something to think about. families and youth can think about obtaining secured credit cards. Secured credit cards are often a good way to build initial credit. With a secured credit card, the individual can deposit a certain amount when getting the card, such as $300, and then his or her purchases cannot exceed that amount. It's something to keep in mind as an example of credit protection. So these are some resources on protecting. I won't go through, I've done a couple so you have an idea of how you can highlight resources and information for youth, and there's also another slide that is for families as well. But I highly recommend taking some time and just going through and seeing what resources you think would work well for you based on the youth you know that you'll be working with, and then with the families as well. So what do youth need to know about spending? So this is an important slide because youth definitely like to spend money. And there's a variety of ways in which people spend money. Cash, a debit card, a credit card, or a check. It's important to remind you that swiping a debit card or writing a check takes money directly from the checking account. Sometimes that's not always easy to remember, but it's important to reiterate that to them and to make sure that there's enough money in the account to pay for whatever expenses they are buying for their products. And then also with the advent of all this technology, you know, that we have discussed in the PowerPoint thus far, there's also a lot of apps that are out there. So again, you have to be savvy, and as well as families, think about which apps or apps that would be good and that would work for them and individually and for the family. So we have a couple of apps that we are aware of and that we have found them to be resourceful. But again, like anything else, everybody needs to do their research and look into everything with regarding to sharing your personal financial information. But there are apps out there like Mint and Sweep that can be connected to your bank account, your credit card information, and your loans. And it can, in addition, track your spending and your debt as well. So it puts all that information in one place. How can families discuss spending with youth? I recommend that reviewing each of these different ways that families can talk to their teens and young people about spending money. I would also mention to families that teaching youth different ways to save and the importance of living within their means may prevent a lot of hard and expensive lessons later in life. And the next slide is information, again, more resources, but this is specific to spending. So the next principle for financial capability is understanding borrowing. Again, reviewing these key points on the slide to use and what these are the things that youth need to know. I would share with them additionally that typically when people borrow money, they have to pay back that money with interest. And when it comes to borrowing money from a bank, credit union, or credit card company, you're going to pay them interest. And interest is calculated as a percentage of what you borrowed, and it's added to the amount you must repay. And that's how lenders make a profit. So it's important that young people have an understanding of that, and especially as they're thinking about student loans, car loans, and eventually home loans. One last item that I wanted to mention was the cost of borrowing is usually presented by the lender as an annual percentage rate, which is APR, as most of you are probably familiar with. But I would highlight to them APR and interest rate on the credit card and how that can impact them, their credit history and their credit score, and so on and so forth. So how can families discuss borrowing with youth? It's important, again, as we've seen through each of these different areas and principles, is having those conversations that really is essential to developing financial capability for youth. And the same goes with borrowing. And I would, when talking to families, review these key points, but also to talk to them that many young people often take out loans, especially student loans, without fully understanding the implications of it. And so I think encouraging families to have discussions with the teens and the young people that are going into college settings, and again, going back to their career interests, thinking about the long-term goals and where they're going to college and the cost of going to college, and then the salary or earnings that they will be receiving that comes from obtaining those credentials or degree. It's an important conversation because it all relates back to everything else and leading the young person to financial success later in life. So definitely encourage families to really, look into if student loans is something that they really want to look into. It's important that youth have a good idea how it can impact their financial situation later in life based on how much they borrow. These are resources on borrowing. And again, I just review these resources to see which ones you find of interest. Again, there is more in the info briefs as well that you can review on your own time, and then highlight different ones that you feel would be most beneficial to your audience. I do, while we're talking about financial capability, we're also serving young people with disabilities as well, and we don't want to get into all of the details about disability benefits. However, I think it definitely needed to be mentioned, and I think families need to know and youth need to know how disability benefits will apply to them. So just reiterate the importance of setting up a time to meet with a benefits counselor to determine the benefit that youth and families are eligible to receive and how that will impact their future planning. So these are a couple of resources that you could give to families and to youth that are looking for more information along those lines. And these are some additional resources that families that you could give to them and to youth if they're wanting to delve into more resources and information. I just wanted to include those pieces for you. So this, the essential tips again is kind of that you want to really drive home to young people and to families about managing their money. This is kind of, this is basically wrapping up the presentation after going through the key principles and going into each section. Again, you want to really drive home key points so that the message is received by your audiences. But the key to remember and to encourage is to start as early as possible. So youth starting early and families starting with the young people early on these conversations is critical. So these are some additional financial literacy resources. I just wanted to point out a couple of them that I like. One is the Financial Fitness for Life Parents Guide. The Council for Economic Education has published an online ebook version on their financial literacy curriculum for parents, and these guides are for students in grades K through 12, K through 12. So K through 5, they have one section for K through 5, and then they have another section 6 through 12. But these guides provide simple lessons that parents can do, and they also have activities that parents could do with their children. So since I have been encouraging starting early, I wanted to ensure that you had a resource that you can highlight to parents about having these conversations early. I also like the H&R block, dollars, cents blocks for parents. These blog posts cover a wide range of issues and apply to parents, such as co-signing a loan with your teen, 4 things teens need to know before taking out a loan. Like, they're really short and they're brief, but they provide a lot of really great essential information. Again, these are the info briefs that I mentioned earlier that are in your files down in the lower right-hand corner along with the PowerPoint presentation, but this slide also has the link and can take you through them, take you directly to them. And I neglected to mention that there were a lot of other slides with the underlines, so they're hyperlinked, so it will take you directly to that particular resource. And then this is my contact information if you have any questions about the PowerPoint, but it's also a placeholder for you to ensure that you share your contact information with families and with youth that you are sharing this information with them. Excuse me. So that is the end of my presentation. I will be happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. This was really helpful. And as you all, I hope, are thinking of some questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. I think that might be the easiest. If that is not an accessible method for you, feel free to verbally unmute and mention the question to us. Jessica, I have a question. Personally, I know that growing up, my mom and dad took care of all my needs, and I really didn't want for anything. How do you help, or what would you recommend to do to help kids and young adults get interested and find the importance in learning about their finances?
That's a great question. Just from my own personal experience, I mean, I was kind of in a similar situation. My parents just kind of naturally just took care of everything because they were just used to taking care of everything. But since I had just for my own self, I had that personal initiative and drive to want to go out and earn money. So I started earning money when I was 10 years old. I started doing chores and different things around the house, and then when I got a little bit older, I did babysitting, and then that expanded to other types of jobs where I could earn money. So, you know, just encouraging young people to get out there as early as and as often as they can, just to begin earning that money, and then encouraging those conversations with parents and with the youth as well. Having youth, you know, the great thing about this kind of presentation, I wish I had received when I was young, because then I could have approached my parents with all these questions, and they would have been happy to answer them. But it was not just one of those things we really honestly just thought about. And I think that happened. And so I think when since you're presenting this material to families and to young people, as many opportunities as to spread that awareness and encouraging those conversations will bring those natural supports in place and getting people to start thinking about those things. Excuse me. That's a great question, though.
So let me start reading a few that are in the chat box.
Okay.
So one is from Ange, and I don't know if you can see this, Jessica, but it says, let's see here, in Missouri, is required to teach a finance class. The curriculum is complicated for students with disabilities, especially math. Is there a free resource to explore to assist parents find good model to advocate for when it comes to modifying the curriculum for students with disabilities? So what is out there? And I know you already covered a few options there, Jessica, but are there any other options for parents to look at to advocate for a better curriculum for students with disabilities?
That's an excellent question. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of any, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. I will be happy to look into this and get back to you on this so that you can share this information, because I know that is something that's very important to share.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
That was important for a few individuals on the call. So what I'm hoping to do is, if you're able to send that to us, Jessica, we'll send it to everyone who was on the call, and make sure that that's spread out. And for those of you who are interested in at least receiving a note that you attended this webinar, we can make sure that that happens. We do not provide credit hours, but we could certainly provide a letter saying that you had joined us on this call. Are there any other questions about finances? I know that this is an overwhelming topic, especially as we're moving forward and hoping that with ABLE accounts and different methods that are supposed to be helping our young adults with disabilities get jobs, you know, including myself, I wonder, sure, I have a job, but what am I going to do with the money? So I think that this is a fantastic resource, especially when we're talking to families and youth about the issues. Any other questions? If not, this webinar will be up on our YouTube page, and we'll be sending out a link shortly once we have it closed captioned. It is definitely something we encourage you to share. Watch again, whatever you need to do. And with that, once it's up on YouTube, there will be a link to the resources, the information brief, and the actual PowerPoint connected to that YouTube page so that you can access it, especially for those hyperlinks that I think will be unbelievably helpful. Whether you have a disability or not, I think just using it will be great. Jessica, any final thoughts?
No, except to say thank you so much for having me, and I hope this information was useful, and it will help you in delivering your training to young people and to parents that you work with. Like you said, it is a very complex it's a very complex issue with a lot of information. So I hope that it was organized in such a way that you could take it apart or in the pieces that you need and or use all of it as it is presented to you today. So again, I just want to reiterate my heartfelt thanks for having me, and I appreciate all the work that you all do in supporting families and youth across the country.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Our next webinar, which is on post-secondary education, working with families and other institutions, is in October. I think it's the 13th. If you got the information for this one, you should get the information for the next, but I hope that you can join us. And until then, have a wonderful summer, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.